Brought to you by Basecamp Ed. I'm Morgan, your host of the Homeschool Curious podcast. Whether you're deep in the homeschooling world or just starting to get curious, I'm here to bring you inspiring conversations with parents, educators, and business owners navigating the wild, wonderful world of parenting. Let's get curious together. Welcome to today's episode, where I am beyond thrilled to introduce my next special guest, Felice Gerwitz, the visionary founder of the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Network and Media Angels, as well as a successful real estate entrepreneur. Felice is a true trailblazer in the homeschooling community, inspiring countless families through her podcast, Vintage Homeschool Moms, and her unwavering dedication to empowering parents and educators. I'm honored that she's welcomed me into her incredible network, giving the Homeschool Curious podcast a platform to share our mission. I want to share a quick story about my journey with Felice. During my first interview to join her network, I was so nervous. As a previous recruiter, it was my job to interview candidates. I am not used to being the one being interviewed. In the first half of our meeting, she grilled me on every detail of my podcast and its premise and the Basecamp Ed vision. But once she saw my passion and commitment, Felice became one of my biggest champions. Her belief in me has been a game changer, and I'm so grateful for her mentorship and support. Get ready for an inspiring conversation with a woman who's truly shaping the homeschooling world. Today's episode is sponsored by Basecamp Ed, a community building app that is free for parents to find local, like-minded families, dedicated teachers, and educational resources. Connect with parents to form your own co-ops, playdates, or groups. Need a math tutor or a sports coach? Teachers can list their credentials. There is also a business platform to discover game-changing educational brands. Take control of your child's educational journey. Visit their website at basecamped.com or download it in the App Store. Homeschooling was never meant to be done alone. It takes a village. Build it with Basecamp Ed. I have Felice Gerwitz on with me, and I'm so excited to hear from her. Before we jump in, Felice, just tell me a little bit more about you and your family.
I am a mom of 5. Never thought I would say that. I thought I'd have my 2 kids, a boy and a girl, and I would be done. And then 12 years later, we had our next 3. I had children in my very young years, and I had children in my what I called my Elizabethan years. They kept us young, as my husband said. We're still on this ball field because I have athletes in our family. So we homeschooled all the way through. When I started, I was all in. I am like one of those 100,000% people. When I finally bought into homeschooling, I was going to do it forever. But there were a lot of times that I wasn't so sure. And my husband was a big supporter of homeschooling. He saw how our kids thrived, and out of that came need. And that's when we can get into the Media Angels and how that started. And then the podcast network. To be sitting here today with you talking about this. I've been married 46 years. It's been an amazing journey. Last year, we bought each other mugs that said, married to Mr. Always Right and Mrs. Always Right. So we have our matching mugs. We use those on Sundays to remind ourselves. And I keep telling my husband, should I Sharpie it? Because it's now 46 years. And he goes, no, let's just leave it at 45. He's my best friend. He and I like to do a lot of things together. And he still calls me his girlfriend and will text me and ask me out to dinner and things like that. So as he said, he chose wisely. I was blessed with an amazing man.
I always knew you had 5, but I didn't know the big age gap. Was number 3 a whoopsie and then you guys just kept going? Or like, was it a very intentional, like, I want more than 2?
So I'm going to give you probably more than you asked for. It was actually a vasectomy reversal is what it was. And that's my testimony. I'm actually flying to Nebraska this weekend to speak at a women's ministry. Not a popular topic, even among Catholic women, I guess. But it just, like, the Lord took our hearts because we wanted to do everything for the Lord and raise our families to love God. And it was like, yes, Lord, we're giving you everything except this one aspect of our lives. And so I always caution people because a lot of times it's that, well, you've got a boy and a girl and everything's good and just stop there. Instead of saying, okay, Lord, I'm going to be wise in my decisions and with my family. So The last three have been such a blessing. And when I felt like I needed to write this book, One More Child, I had to sit my kids down, Morgan, and say, and you shouldn't be here. But the Lord has really been on my heart, because I always tell them God has big things in store for you because of our change of heart. And they are such a blessing. And they, like I said, they've kept us young. Like
Yeah.
my baby's 25 this year. He was born in 2000.
Oh,
So yeah, I was 44 when I had him, and he's brilliant. So, people will say, weren't you worried? And I said, at that point in time, I think I was just pregnant and tired and homeschooling high schoolers. One of the things I'm going to say about having a large family is that you don't have a lot of woe is to me. You just don't have time for it. So you persevere and you do the best you can. You pray, okay, Lord, you gave me all these kids. Now
yeah.
help.
Help.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Did
No.
your earlier ones ever enter traditional school, or did you kind of always know that you were going to homeschool them from a young age?
I had no idea. In fact, because I was an educator, I was planning to go back to teaching at some point. My husband and I agreed that once I had the first, I would stay home with them when they were little and then go back to teaching. And then his business did really well. And he said, you don't need to go back to work. We're good. Truthfully, I wasn't finding, that's why I'm really excited about your Basecamp app, because I wasn't finding a lot of like-minded friends. I found friends, but it was funny. I gravitated to the women who were older, had a career and got married later. And so my friends tended to be 5 and 10 years older than I was. Didn't really meet people at church. I was ready to go back to teaching because there was a nice group of friends that I had there. So my son started having learning difficulties, and my background is elementary ed, learning disabilities, and early childhood. I had the academic background to be able to say, okay, he's delayed, something's wrong, we need more testing. He did get diagnosed with mosaicism, which is a form of Downs, but very high functioning. I hate
What
telling
age?
people he was 4 because I
Okay.
knew there were just some things. I mean, I ended up changing doctors because he kept telling me I was looking for things. So moms, if you're out there and a doctor tells you your instinct is wrong, and then he would just say, you've got a background in education and you're just looking for things. Moms don't look for things. But
Yeah.
it turned out wonderfully because Neil was able to thrive. I did put both of my children in preschool, and it was a very elite preschool by Edison's Home in Fort Myers, and it was very expensive to get into the school, and the parents there really seemed to care about their children's education, and I could tell he's floundering there. If you're floundering when you're 4 years old, it's going to be difficult. So I did put him into a private school for half a year, and that didn't work out. And that's when my husband said, well, try it for half a year and see. And then we never looked back. So that
Yeah.
was in 1986. So we homeschooled all the way through 2018 when Mike went to college.
Homeschool OG.
Oh
Like
my
you
gosh.
were
Yeah.
doing it before it was cool.
Well, we couldn't find books, and we had to name our school so that we could send it on letterhead stationery to actually get textbooks. And then I would get these textbooks and go, why are we doing these? They're horrible. So we did a lot of hands-on and unit studies, and then I wrote some and started speaking at homeschool conferences. So it snowballed after that.
Yeah. Did you ever have a time where one of your 5 questioned why they were homeschooled?
No, the first 2, if you were a walking, talking, breathing person at a homeschool field trip, we loved you. Those 2 loved people, loved to go to all of these events. We live on acreage, but the bus used to stop down the road, and my threat was, if you're not good, you're going to go to school. Part of it's self-preservation, okay? So even back then, I wanted to write, but I was going to write this bestseller, not teaching science and having fun. And it is one of Kathy Duffy's top curriculums, but that's not what I had in mind, okay? I was going to write this novel. And so I played around with that and different things. So my goal was to be done with school by noon. And that way it gave the children time to do their thing and to think and to explore. And then with the last 3, very gifted, my husband's an athlete. So they were a lot more gifted with softball and baseball. When they got a little bit older, we didn't really start them. I think Nick didn't start till he was 8 or 9. And then the next 2 were like more of the 5-year-olds. They did a lot of like just practicing because they wanted to. They just loved it. And I had more routines than strict schedules. I talk about this on my podcast at times. It was doable for all of us. Some years I would just be like, gosh, we didn't learn anything this year. And then as I was putting stuff together, we did evaluations more so than standardized testing. And I was like, oh my gosh, look at how much we did. I advise moms to just keep track of that during the year so that you don't end up going, did we do anything? Because sometimes you question how you did. But no, my kids loved homeschooling and they were the envy of a lot of their friends, truthfully.
Oh, I love that.
So, yeah.
Good to know. So kind of switching topics, you're very humble, but you have done, besides homeschool all 5 of your kids, you are very well known in the homeschooling space of podcasting and writing books, and you've built your own podcast empire, which is called the Vintage Homeschool Moms. And it's like a household
I think it's funny.
now.
Yeah.
But what inspired you to start your podcast?
So I had another podcast before this one over on Blog Talk Radio. It was this ancient thing. It was a network before networks were a thing. And each person had an individual podcast. So you didn't really work with other people. But for a brief moment in time, I was really tired of the homeschool community. It was really growing and it was really changing. And I had already written my books and I didn't go to a lot of conferences outside of Florida and, Georgia. And I think I made it up to Arkansas. But I told my husband, I said, I need a break from the homeschool community. It was going through a lot of growing pains. And so I decided that one of the 90% of the questions I got, Morgan, were how did you write and how did you get your book published? So I wrote this tiny little information in a nutshell book. And then I asked Carol Topp to write business tips and taxes for writers, because those were the two things that you wrote a book and then you made all this money and then your CPA is going, well, you're going to be paying all this taxes and you didn't even think about that. So I did this show called Writing and Publishing. And that was so much fun because I got all of these people to send me their books and I interviewed different authors and some Christian romance writers. And it was like #1 ranked in some of the streams. And it was like big fish, little pond. Like podcasting was just starting. People didn't even know what it was. You could not listen to it on your phone. You had to listen to it online or an RSS feed. For those of you who remember what that is, you got an email with a link and you went and listened. At one point I said to my husband, I'm not really doing things for the homeschool community that I love. And that break was perfect for me to be thinking about things. So I did a homeschool expo. And I took that over from a lady by the name of Cindy Rushton, talk about a pioneer. She homeschooled before I did and just was miking everybody at conferences going, what are you doing? And she going, oh, you have to record your talk, cassette player back in the day of archaic slide rule. No, we had calculators. So fast forward, I said, I'm getting these invitations to Texas and to California and to all over the place to speak. But my husband said, who's going to be with the kids and how are you going? So I said, you know what, you're right. So I knew a lot of the people in the homeschool community, people I had been at conference with, because Florida is a very big conference. So I had spoken like 10 or 11 years in a row at FPEA, which was a big conference. Yep. And so I knew all these people that I'd seen them year to year, and you get to know them, and I'm a talker. And so like Melanie Young and Melanie Wilson, college prep genius, Jean Burke. So just a lot of the people. And so I sent him an email and said, I have an idea. And do you want to talk? Because my idea was to launch this podcast with at least, or this network with at least 20 podcasts. So we called it the Ultimate Radio Show to begin with. And then we changed it to the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Network, which was more encompassing. And so out of everyone I asked, only 2 people said no. And that was Kathy Duffy, who said, I can't do it right now. I don't want my own podcast, but I'll be on your show as much as you want. And the other one was Jay Weil, who was the person who started Apologia Curriculum. So they've both been on my show lots of times. We launched 12 years ago. So it was, one of those things that I didn't know how it would turn out. Morgan, I was like in my 50s when I did that. So, a lot of you are going, oh gosh, I want to do something, but I've got these little kids and everything. Just keep on with your ideas, jot them down. I had a little notebook I carried in my purse for my next brainstorm that I had. Now you can just put it in notes in your phone. And
Yeah.
then when the time was right and when I had that opening and when I was able to do it, I did. And so we kind of haven't looked back. I'm still
Yeah.
here. I'm still podcasting and I've got lots of help. I used to do everything myself, social media and getting all the training for our podcasters. And now we've got someone who takes care of all that for us. So it's been quite a journey.
Like you and your husband have started different businesses even
Oh,
when
yeah.
your babies were little, right? So you've
Right. Yeah.
done, besides the podcast, you have Media Angels, it
Right.
seems like you and your husband did real estate and construction. So
Yeah.
what was that journey? Like how old were your kids? When did you know you wanted to start a business?
So my family, they were a family of entrepreneurs, okay? They owned a bakery. They were both immigrants. And I always like to say, my mother came over legally, my dad not quite so much. We didn't even know this until way later, Morgan. My cousin found all this memorabilia and found records for my dad, but this is after he passed. But he was like a really proud United States citizen. So both my parents were immigrants and they were like, you can do anything. And they were very encouraging to me and always 100% behind anything I wanted to do. And so when my husband and I got married, we could have both been educators because that was his major too, or we could start a business. And we talked about it. And he said, I hated construction and sold all my tools, but that's a business that I know I can support our family and I'm good at it. So we started Gerwitz Construction back in 1982 and have had, some changes in our business. We decided to just focus on framing. So we could have been general contractors, which he is, but we decided that it was better to take less money and have him more focused on family. You've got to look at things and see what works for you. And then he was going to retire into the home inspection business. So he does that on the side just for fun whenever one of the realtor friends of ours. My kids have grown up knowing that we have our own business. I have two that want their own businesses and the other three that said, no way. They want a paycheck. Because it is, when you have your own business, it can be feast or famine, right? But it was natural more for me than my husband. So I always handled like the bookkeeping. And my happiest day was when I was able to hire a bookkeeper, a CPA, and somebody to come in and clean a couple of times a month. You look at things and say, what are you good at? What can you do? And then the other things, you pray that the Lord blesses you with enough money to hire someone else to do it. I have somebody doing all our social media, which makes me very happy. So
for parents that maybe are dreaming of either starting their own side hustle or a full-time business, especially with little kids, what's a good first practical step that you would give?
What I'm seeing a lot recently is micro bakeries. People are just really good at baking and they bake for their family. And like sourdough is a big thing. It took me 2 years to perfect sourdough, believe me. And we don't even like sourdough. So I had to perfect sourdough to make it healthy for you, but not taste so soury. That was a feat. Like they might do an extra loaf. I live in a subdivision that has acreage and I'll see in our Facebook group that somebody's made 6 extra loaves and they'll just put them on the Facebook and sell them for $12 a loaf. That's more than you might pay at a bakery, but it's homemade. And so you can do little things like that. Start small and just ask your friends, is anybody interested in sourdough? Or some people would say, oh my gosh, your chocolate chip cookies are fabulous. It was my mother-in-law's recipe that I've tweaked through the years on how can we make them healthy, so you do things. And then when people like it and they say, can you make this for my party? I had a friend who made birthday cakes. You can start small with whatever that is. And another friend who's fabulous at throwing parties. So someone's like, would you help me throw a party? And our big inclination, Morgan, is of course. And they'll say, well, can I pay you? And you're going to say, no, because you're my friend. So you're going to say, maybe no, because you're my friend to the first one, and then sit down with your husband or another friend and say, okay, let me look at the time I put into it. Let me see what would be something reasonable. I did that with consulting. Like people would say, how did you write a book? And then I had business people come up to me and I got a call one time. And this gentleman said, well, I'm willing to pay your $200 an hour. And I said, excuse me? And he said, yeah, I saw it on your website that you consult for $200 an hour. He had emailed me first, and then I had sent him my phone number to talk to him. And I later got off, and my son-in-law worked for us for about 2 years. And I think my consulting fee was $50 an hour. And apparently he went into my website and changed it to 200 so that it would like, I felt so bad, Morgan, because I was like, was it worth it? And they're like, oh my gosh, you gave me so much information. It was like overload. And then I'd hand him my $9 book, here's information in a nutshell. But he changed it because he said, nobody's going to think you're worth it if you're $50 an hour. Now, I think we even took that off the website because I'm so busy right now. But you know what I'm saying? Like, don't undercut. Sometimes you may not think you're worth it. I don't think I have an empire. Something you did because you were passionate about. Like when we interviewed you to come onto our network, one of the things that I wanted to know was where your heart was and how passionate you were about your topic. And so if you're not passionate, it's going to be short-lived. So if you're thinking about running some type of business, think about something you really love to do. That would not be like work. And then also look at the ages of your children. When my kids were little and we sometimes had conferences, my whole living room was filled with individual orders of books if we ran out that we had to ship people. And I remember one time my whole living room was just filled with packages and books, and the kids were having a blast. I was like, do not label them. Let mommy label them, because they're putting the wrong labels on the wrong books. But they were like so excited to help stack them. And I grew up with that. I grew up in a bakery with my parents cooking, and I grew up in an Italian restaurant. So obviously that's something I love to do, but didn't want to make a career out of it. So
yeah, something I loved that you were talking about in the beginning of our podcast was how you and your husband are just still best friends, still date each other. And I was so lucky that I just got to do a recording on the Vintage Homeschool Moms podcast earlier today too. And something you asked me that I wasn't prepared to ask you on mine, but I'm curious now your answer was, your question to me was, what would you say if a couple was resisting, maybe one wants to homeschool and the other one is resisting, whether it's because they're a dual working family or they don't think the child will thrive in that type of situation, or whatever the resistance is. But what would you give to a couple, especially, coming from a very successful, long-lived relationship? What advice would you have for those couples?
So I was really shocked when he said, well, I'll give you 6 months to try it. And I didn't even come to him with this full case of homeschooling. We just knew our son was struggling and that would be beneficial. Yeah. People are going to say, well, it's because your major was education. And even so, if you listen to my podcast, I will tell you how that was detrimental in so many ways, because when I stopped recreating the school at home, that's when my kids were able to thrive. At some point, when they're in high school, are you going to college? Well, yeah, then you're going to have to do some of these textbooks and so forth. But to begin with, there's so much in life to be able to explore that you don't need this overpowering set curriculum. But one of the things I will say in all of my years of homeschool conferences, some of my favorite stories was the pregnant mommy who didn't even have a kid yet. And she and her husband were just visiting the homeschool conference because he was not on board. And this one couple, he was a corporate attorney and he had this whole vision when his wife was a paralegal. He just thought she was going to continue on and she wanted to stay home with her child. And so by the time they were done, I was like, okay, you've got to come back and tell me at the end of this conference what you decided. Do not leave without letting me know. They were homeschool curious, Morgan. It wasn't a thing then, but they were. Or having 2 doctors come. They shared a practice. And I just said, how are you going to do it? And she goes, oh, I've already gotten this back room in my office and my husband and I are going to stagger our patients. I had a son and a daughter that were 8 and 10 being bullied. And they did not want that for their children. And so there have been situations of that's impossible. That is not going to work. And yet they were really successful in homeschooling. I would see them year after year at conference and they would, they had my curriculum already, bought every book I had. And then they would just wave or come and say hello. There's just so many stories of people who, if your husband is hesitant, take him to a homeschool conference. Notice I didn't say jump online and do a lot of research, because you can do that as well. But just like you like the community of people to people with Basecamp, I think it's really important to attend a conference in person and kind of get that feeling for what is a homeschool community like. Look at the diversity of people there. Some people are very limited budget. So they're looking for creative ways to homeschooling. And I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yeah, that was great. I love the piece about don't go online. Sometimes it's too overwhelming,
Yeah,
but I love the idea of visiting a conference.
right.
I went as a mom this summer to one of the great homeschool conventions because Melanie Wilson told me to, and I was in
Yeah,
California visiting my parents. I left just feeling so inspired. I got cute things for starting kindergarten for my 5-year-old, but I listening to all the speakers and felt fired up about, okay, I made the
wonderful.
right decision.
The worst day of homeschooling is better than the best day of school, public school, private school, co-op, because you, as my Italian uncle used to say, you are creating memories with your children. And those are the memories that they're going to talk about. Of course, as my children are now adults, I'm hearing all the things that they did that I didn't know that they did while I'm hosting conferences. Or wait, Morgan, till you're interviewing somebody, and then your 16-year-old boys are going to be telling you what they got into that you didn't know about. My one son, who's now in the military, apparently was jumping off the roof. It's a single story, but still, and practicing rolling. And he never didn't get into the paratrooper program, which is probably good. But the other two, when I got off the call and I came downstairs, and they're like, Mom, Michael needs to tell you something. But Mom, it was like a perfect landing. Okay, you experienced it. Let's move on. Or when they built life-size catapults in the front yard, we were studying catapults. I wasn't expecting them to have these, like you've seen them launch pumpkins. So they were launching a basketball by the time I got out there. So you just never know. I actually found the old video back in the day, like when we first started taking them on our phones. They have so many stories when they're all together, Morgan, and they're talking about it.
Yeah,
It's all about their homeschooling, and they all plan to homeschool. So
I
to
love that.
me,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the blessing and confirmation that what we did was right.
My last question for you, because you have a lot of experience. You've done 5 kids over a 32-year span, basically. But
Right.
what's one tip to keep the homeschooling joyful and sustainable?
Every evening we ended with something positive. So we prayed together as a family, and then we would stop at the end of prayers and we went around the room saying, like, what is one thing you're thankful to God for today? Like, it's kind of like, what is one good thing that happened? And I had some kids who would say pass if it was a very bad day. And then I never said anything in the moment. Like later I would just say, so you're thankful for nothing, think about that. How can you not be thankful for having good food? But you're taking that child, not doing it in the whole group setting thing. I always did things that they were not expecting because I really truthfully don't like surprises, but I like to give other people surprises. And one time there's a lot of fighting going on. You're siblings, you're around each other all the time. So I said, this week, we're going to have one person that we are going to pick, and we are going to either, if they were little, couldn't write, or draw a picture of something happy. And we put that under their plate. And then they weren't allowed to look at it until dinner's over. And it's kind of hard, but it teaches patience and it teaches perseverance. That's where the curriculum writer in me comes in. But it was just good because they were getting a little note from a sibling, and sometimes they would just save them. I have a book I really want to write about things that we do, especially during the holidays. When we're together, we still do like the group project or the group craft, and they roll their eyes and just go, oh, really? And they're so competitive. Like one year it was, I handed out Christmas cards that were blank. I said, you are going to write something that person can look at during the year when they're feeling down. And we just randomly picked a person. And I know one of my sons got me, and he was so upset because he really didn't know what to write. And he wrote a beautiful sentiment that I still have in my Bible.
Oh,
So just little things like that continues to bring us together. My son's in South Korea. I have a daughter in Bradenton. I have 3 that live close to home. As a family, we want to instill those. We are a family, and we do things together. And yes, sometimes you're separating your kids out to different ends of the room, or sometimes I would make them sit face to face if they really were not getting along, not within hitting distance. You kind of push the chairs back a little bit, and you kind of you're in the room, and you guys need to work it out because you're not going to be around all the time. So there's 100 different things that I can say, but just hopefully something sparked an idea or a thought in someone's mind. But whether you homeschool for 32 years or 5 years, it's just a wonderful blessing.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on to the Homeschool Curious podcast. You guys
Thank you.
have to go check out the Vintage Homeschool Moms. Like she's mentioning, writing a book about these different traditions. She does really great episodes of things to do during the summer or fun fall traditions. You do such great lists of fun things that are practical and easy and not expensive, and that just keeps family ties strong. So definitely go check out her podcast. Thank you for giving me a chance on your network. Is there anything else that I missed of a way to get in touch with you?
No, that's wonderful. I'm on social media. We have a homeschool podcast family group that you can hang out with, and you just have to tag me on there. And if you have a question for me, I'm happy to answer. And all my other podcasts, and Morgan's on there too.
I am.
Yeah. So, but thank you so much for having me on, and I look forward to the great things that we're going to hear from your show as well.
Oh, thank you, Felice, and thank you all for listening. Until next time. This has been a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Network. If you made it all the way to the end, you are amazing. Thank you for listening and your support. Let's stay connected, and here are my tasks for you. Subscribe, like, and share on your favorite podcast app or on my website, basecamped.com. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook at basecamped app, and go download Basecamp if you haven't already. Leave a comment and spread the love.